This video will discuss macros and how to use them in preparation for customizing the ribbon. The next video will show how to place tools onto the tool palettes and work with the macros there. First of all, macros are a single line of instruction that expands automatically into a set of instructions to perform a particular task. Basically, they define the input that is sent to the AutoCAD command prompt. Macros don't require any program knowledge, which is a benefit to the average AutoCAD user. Macros do require that you understand how AutoCAD works. Overall, macros allow you to automate redundant tasks and increase productivity. In preparation for creating macros, you have to understand a little bit about the syntax, or what goes when and where. The key to writing macros is to have an understanding of commands, syntax, and the rules for writing macros. That's what we'll discuss next. Basically, a macro is nothing more than the commands one would input when seen on the command line, whether you're drawing circles, arcs, inputting text, whatever it happens to be. One important key to remember about a macro is that every character in a macro counts. Spaces, hyphens, dots, they all have important information that goes along with them. So next we're going to look at some of these special characters. The semicolon is the equivalent of pressing the enter key, as is the blank space. And this makes sense because think about using AutoCAD. If you were to type circle and then press the space bar, it's the same thing as pressing circle, typing circle, and then pressing the enter key. In a macro, however, it's difficult to see that blank space, so many users will decide to put in the semicolon instead. Anytime you want the macro to pause for user input, you're going to put in a backslash. The underscore provides international support for non-English versions of AutoCAD. That means that if somebody has installed AutoCAD somewhere else in the world, and maybe they've installed it in their native language, Spanish, French, Japanese, whatever it happens to be, that underscore will translate the command that you create and put it into their native language if it can. The period ensures that undefined commands will work. We haven't talked about undefined commands really, but it's not a bad thing to have in there. We won't need it for what we're doing. It's a good idea that when you're creating commands for macros that you do not have dialog boxes that pop up. So the hyphen will run a command, the command line version of a command rather than the dialog box version of a command. The star repeats a macro until canceled by the user. The star would go at the very beginning of the macro. The up caret, or the little upward arrow, is the equivalent of holding the control button down. Control C that you'll see here in a few minutes is the same thing as pressing escape. But if there's any other toggles that you want to use, the up caret would be holding the control key. If you do know a little bit about programming and you want to put in a diesel expression, you can use the $sign to introduce that diesel expression. Of course, the @ symbol specifies the last reference point in picked when you're making a drawing, and the apostrophe issues a transparent command. For example, you can change zooms and you can change snaps and grid and that kind of stuff transparently. Not all commands can be run transparently, though. A few things you must know about running macros, and I'll call these imperatives. First of all macros must begin with the Control-C, Control-C. This is the equivalent of pressing the escape key twice and will return the user to the command line. If you think about it, if I was in the line command and I wanted to draw a circle, when I choose the circle command off of the ribbon, the macro that runs the circle command starts with escape, escape. But if I was in the line command and I just typed in circle and pressed enter, AutoCAD would give me an error message. So if I wanted to get out of the line command, I would press escape and then I would be able to run the circle command. There are a couple commands in AutoCAD where you have to press escape twice to get out of the command. So that's why every macro must start with Control-C, Control-C, or escape, escape. All characters in a macro are important, including the space. A space is seen as an enter key and will affect how macros operate. Some users write macros with the semicolon in space in the place of the space bar so that the user can see where the enter is located. I don't care which way you do it, but I do suggest that you are consistent with whatever method you choose. Always use standard commands in macros. Never use the alias version. So if I'm writing a macro that has the line command in it, I'm going to type in the whole command line, L-I-N-E. I'm not going to type just L. And the reason is because there are ways that people can change the alias of a command so that line might not run the line command, but it might instead run the polyline command. Finally, always use the 1 or 2 character alias when choosing the option inside of a command. So for example, if I'm in the line command and I draw a couple segments and I want to close the line, I would just type C instead of the whole word close. So it's the exact opposite of using the command line itself. More imperatives. When writing macros, you can also use global support in which, again, the macro can be read in the other language. And that's this underscore character. So the underscore character tells AutoCAD that the command should be translated into that other language prior to being executed. If you want to run the same macro several times in a row, you'll precede the entire command line, even the Control-C, Control-C, with the asterisk. And that repeats the macro until somebody presses the escape key or runs another macro to cancel the current one. So next up, we're going to talk about creating macros using tool palettes. Tool palettes are a great way to experiment with macros because you can add tools to the tool palettes and change them there, but they don't change them anywhere else. You can add any tool to the tool palette by right-clicking on the tool palette sidebar and choose Customize Commands, and then you can drag any tool from the CUI panel to the tool palette. Once the tool is on the palette, you can right-click the tool and choose Properties, and then the Properties, the command string on the Properties is the macro. You can change the image by right-clicking on the image in the Properties tool palette, but you must know the location of that new image. So this concludes the instructions. The next video is going to describe and show how to actually put a tool on a tool palette, modify the macro for those purposes.